What's going on, guys? Hope this video finds you well. So the Mega Man Battle Network Legacy Collections have been out for several months now, and I know I'm approaching the end of my playthroughs, which I've been streaming on the channel. As of recording this, I am making my way through Battle Network 6, and am in the process of getting all of the achievements / trophies in Volume 2, which I had already done in Volume 1 a couple of months ago. And so suffice to say, I've been really enjoying revisiting these games for the first time in a couple of years, but it really got me thinking about the insane amount of potential that a Mega Man Battle Network 7 has. There's no inkling of this being a real project at all, so I don't want anyone to get it twisted and think that I'm talking about something that already exists. This is purely a hypothetical video of things I would like to see in the instance of a Battle Network 7, which I'm not holding my breath for, but would love to see come to fruition. Now, whether or not any or all of these ideas are implemented is not the most important thing to me. This is mostly for fun, just to kind of pitch some ideas to you guys that have been thrown around with myself and with my chat on the Battle Network streams as well. But before I give too many details on what my ideal Battle Network 7 is, or at least aspects to it, I want to hear from you in the comments below as to what you want to see in the instance of a Battle Network 7. Because I would like to, if I get enough comments, do a follow-up video where I kind of read through your comments and respond in some way, giving my opinions on what you guys have to say about that. So feel free to do that now, or you can wait to hear me out just in case I say anything that you had in mind. But without further ado, let's just kind of get right into it. So as much as I love the Battle Network games, it's one of my favorite series ever. I've genuinely been having a lot of fun playing through them again. Even some of the entries that I didn't like so much have kind of grown on me in some ways. I don't know if it's Stockholm Syndrome or what, but regardless, these games are great, all in all. Obviously, each one has little idiosyncrasies and differences from one another, but there are also some idiosyncrasies and design decisions across pretty much all of them that, if remedied and done away with in a BN7, would make the experience so much more enjoyable, even more so than these games that I already love. I think that if a BN7 is given the time and care that it deserves, it should easily be the best Battle Network game. There should be no excuse otherwise, partially because of the GBA hardware limitations, but also just because of how game design has evolved since then, in addition to just the rapid-fire nature at which these games released, which I don't think allowed for them to necessarily reach the level of, maybe not polish, I mean certainly in the dialogue, right? Like there's lots of typos, but you know, balance and pacing and stuff like that. And so the first main point that I want to talk about without rambling too much is that of random encounters. I had this idea that a Battle Network 7 could actually go with non-pixel art and have full-on 3D models. I love pixel art. Pixel art games have held up incredibly well visually, much more than like low-res polygonal games, for instance. And plus, pixel art has seen a resurgence over the past decade plus in the indie scene, and so we're getting plenty of that. And while I wouldn't stick my nose up at a pixel art Battle Network 7, I would want this game to have the budget behind it to warrant full 3D environments and characters. I'm curious to hear if anyone agrees with me on this, but I feel like there's something about Battle Network and Persona that feel almost like kindred spirits in a way, or at least modern Persona, of course. But I wouldn't want Battle Network to look exactly like the modern Persona games per se, but I think something akin to that sort of, as far as 3D models. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of other examples too. That's just the first one that jumped to mind as far as 3D stylized RPGs. Because, you know, Final Fantasy has been going for the photorealistic thing for a long time, and I don't think that suits Battle Network. Battle Network is much more stylized in its art direction, and so I think going for photorealism would be a huge mistake. So let's say it goes for some kind of 3D anime-ish aesthetic, which is very vague, but you know what I mean. I don't think it's that hard to picture something like this. What I do think would be cool, but maybe not entirely necessary, is when you go on the net, maybe it transitions to pixel art. I think that could be kind of cool, or at least maybe when you enter battle. But again, I don't think it's totally necessary. I think as long as the battle system still has you on like that 6x3 grid and you still move with precision, it's not like I've mentioned with platformers where a pixel art platformer is easier to be precise compared to a 2.5D platformer. But in a game like this, where the combat is grid-based, I don't really see it being much of an issue. It would just be a matter of putting the budget behind it so it looks better than something like a Mega Man 11, which I like the art direction of, but like the actual quality of the 3D models isn't quite the level of what I'm thinking here. This is a very long-winded way of saying that I think that a Battle Network 7 should do away with truly random encounters, like you're running around and oops, flash to white, you're in a battle now, Now, I think introducing something more akin to, like I was saying, the modern Persona games, where you have some kind of amorphous type of enemy entity in the overworld, which would mean that the net would need to be way more sprawling and open in a way, which I think would be cool, because there are a lot of net areas in the Battle Network games that are very hard to traverse if you don't know where you're going, partially because of their labyrinthine nature, but also because of the random encounters. I find that in games with truly random encounters, whenever you're trying to traverse or do puzzles, it's easy to get distracted by a battle and forget what you were doing. And so then you have to refocus, and by the time you refocus on like, okay, oh, this was what I was doing with the puzzle, or oh, this was the direction I was heading, you hit another encounter. I think having some kind of pixelated amorphous entities roaming around the net that you can run into to trigger encounters would be the way to go. Should a BN7 be this ambitious? Which obviously, if I'm talking hypotheticals, I'm gonna be ambitious. It's not fun to talk about this otherwise, but I'm also not so delusional to think that this is like an expectation of mine per se. It's mostly just how I would handle it if I had some kind of say. The main thing is just not truly random encounters, so that way traversal and puzzling is not extremely tedious, like it can be in the current set of Battle Network games that we have. And this would help a lot with the second main criticism I have of the Battle Network games in general, and that is the amount of unnecessary backtracking. I could point to any number of examples, but the main one that jumps to mind is in Battle Network 5, which, as much as I love BN5, it's pretty egregious in that game, but it's present in pretty much all of them to certain degrees. And so in BN5, you go to End Area 5 to do the second to last liberation mission in the main story with Cosmo Man. And so you go and you do that, the battle ends, and then it's like, oh, there's this purple wall of flames. We need to go to the Undernet, but we can't right now. Let's jack out. And then Jasmine / Rabita is like, hey, I want to go to the Undernet for whatever reason it is. Doesn't matter. So you essentially chase them down to End Area 5 again, which there's not really a super direct way to get there. You have to either climb up in the castle and take End Area 3, or you jack into, I think it's like the horse statue or whatever in End City, which is probably better than going all the way up into the castle and then having to go all the way back down after. And then you start in End Area 2, I want to say, but you're basically in 3 at that point. It's just you're at the start of End Area 3 instead of more than halfway through if you start from the home page. And so you make your way to End Area 5, and then, oh, looks like Proto Man / Colonel got captured and is going to be evil now, so we got to jack out again. And then, oh no, Medi / Toadman is going to chase after Cloudman because they captured Colonel / Proto Man. Got to go all the way through to End Area 5 again, and then even further. And then so you go all the way through to, what is it, Undernet 3 or 4 or whatever? Doesn't matter. You go all the way to the Undernet Liberation mission. You do that, leave, and then granted, I think you do a couple of things before this next one. You still have to go all the way back to the very end of the Undernet again to get Proto Soul or Colonel Soul, depending on which version you're playing, of course. You're passing through these same areas like 4 or 5 times or something for like not really any good reason. And while I would like to see the story in BN7 structured in a way that doesn't require this, I think removing the completely random encounters from the game would make the unnecessary backtracking not sting as much. And so those are the main points that I like really want to see implemented if we see a BN7. But now I'm going to get into smaller stuff that I think would be cool to see, but I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if these things weren't implemented. And so let's talk narrative. As much as I think Battle Network 3's story is the best in the series, pretty easily, I don't think it can't be outdone. BN3's story is executed well, and it has emotional resonance, and that's like pretty much all I can ask for from Game Boy Advance Battle Network. But if we're making a higher budget Battle Network game in the 2020s, I'd want to see something a little bit more ambitious. It doesn't have to be crazy. In fact, I wouldn't want it to get too crazy to the point where the execution's bad. But once again, I don't think that BN3's story is like untouchable, as much as I think BN3's story is great. And so my kind of hypothetical for the story, which, you know, it could go any number of directions. I'm not beholden to like just this path, but it was a thought that I had that I thought was cool. Where at the end of BN6, there's like an epilogue where Lan's son Patch is referenced. I would say introduced, but I don't think you see him on screen in any capacity. Whether or not this game is called Battle Network 7 or if they want to call it Battle Network something else, that's fine. I also want to address, oh, but Star Force exists, and that was the follow-up to Battle Network. Well, yeah, Mega Man X was the follow-up to Classic, and we're still getting Classic games. I could see them calling it something other than BN7 or putting a subtitle whether it's with the 7 or not. If a BN7 were to be announced, I would go in with the assumption that we're never going to get one after this again, which probably wouldn't happen because I would hope that a BN7 would sell well enough to get more. I would be satisfied enough with just getting a 7th entry. Again, hypothetically, that it's as ambitious as I'm saying. That's probably not entirely realistic, but whatever. And so I think BN7 would star Patch as the main character. And I think instead of having Mega Man EXE be your net Navi in the game, I think X.exe should be your net Navi, and LAN should keep Mega Man EXE. I actually think because Mega Man EXE is so powerful, lore-wise, story-wise, Mega Man EXE is like busted. Even when you're starting BN5 or 6 and you've saved the world several times and only have cannons, air shots, and mini bombs in your folder, you know? He's still canonically an extremely powerful Navi. That's kind of the assumption. But for gameplay purposes, they have to nerf him. And so I think it'd be cool to have Mega Man EXE be like this legendary hero, as it were, that maybe is taken out of commission to some capacity. I do think Mega Man EXE being a post-game boss would be very fitting and cool.
I also think Yai's Navi Glide should be an extremely difficult post-game boss to make up for him doing absolutely nothing in the first 6 games. Plus, I think that would be kind of a fun reference, I guess, for long-time Battle Network fans.
But I think for the sake of like lore and narrative consistency, I think something removing Mega Man EXE from the equation to make it so Patch has to step up with XEXE would kind of be necessary. And so this is where the kind of linchpin of my narrative idea for this game comes into play. I know Zero EXE was technically introduced in Network Transmission, but the canonicity of that game is questionable, and I don't think it's that great, honestly. But that's kind of neither here nor there. The point is, I think Zero EXE being the last remnant of Dr. Wily, who will not show up in this game, would be really fitting given how the platformer timeline plays out. Now, I don't want the Battle Network timeline to play out as a parallel to the classic timeline, as it were, but I think having those parallels of Zero EXE was left behind by Wily, and maybe he seemingly kills Mega Man EXE or something like that. Maybe he's not really dead, it doesn't really matter. I don't care if that's tropey or whatever. This series is fairly tropey. I've said it in the past that I think it's more than just being tropey, but there's definitely anime tropes present in Battle Network. And so Zero EXE being like the main antagonist, maybe he hunts down more than just Mega Man EXE, maybe the Proto Man also gets hunted down or something, similar to how we kind of assume Zero's origin played out in the classic timeline, which I get there's probably some contentions out there with that, but I kind of like the idea that Zero just basically killed all of Light's creations to that point, because otherwise where is Mega Man in the X games? You just have X. X is the remnant of Dr. Light. Also, small nitpick about the X games is it irritates me when people refer to X, the character, as Mega Man X. Like, the games are called Mega Man X, essentially. Anyhow, I like the idea of Patch having X.exe going up against Zero.exe. It makes too much fucking sense. You could even do the thing where XEXE is able to like talk no jutsu Zero EXE into becoming an ally by the end. I don't really care either way if that ends up happening or if he just kills him or like seals him away or like whatever. It doesn't matter to me too much. I just like this idea as a plot setup.
This all being said, I would not be against a BN7 starring LAN and Mega Man. It's just that I feel like it's been so long since BN6 released that Capcom would likely do some sort of soft reboot kind of thing. And I think the easiest way to do that is to just go with Patch, especially because I think many of us would agree that BN6 was a good place to end off LAN's story. Even though a part of me would love to see LAN and Mega Man portrayed in a manner maybe more akin to the anime, for instance. And they could even introduce some of the technologies and ideas from the later seasons of NT Warrior, like dimensional areas and cross fusion and stuff like that. That could be an angle to go at, not only from a narrative front, but also from a gameplay front.
Now, what comes from X.exe being your net Navi, but having customizable armor? Now, I think the Navi Cust should return in pretty much the same state. I think they could probably throw some twists in there that make it a little bit different and evolved compared to the GBA titles, but I really like the Navi Customizer. I think everyone does, ever since it was introduced in BN3. To me, it's kind of a staple of the series. I think that it should be introduced like at the very beginning of the game, instead of having to go and play an arc or two of the game before getting it. I tend to like when sequels do that. They give you a lot of like the basic actions from the get-go, or at least very early, compared to the initial title, or titles, I guess in this case. So I think starting the game off with the Navi Cust, but then maybe a little ways in introducing the armor pieces where maybe that has some bearing on what type of elemental damage your buster does in base form, and you could just do all sorts of things with customizable leg pieces, arm pieces, chest pieces, and head pieces, right? And I guess you could kind of maybe implement that into the Navi Cust somehow. Maybe each body part has its own grid and particular Navi Cust parts that can be applied to that particular armor piece. Let me know if you guys have any ideas on this, because I think there's something to this that could be really fucking cool. I'm just not exactly sure how I would implement it. And although I'm talking about armor customization and customizing X.EXE's base form as in BASE, not BASS. It would be cool to see a BASS form in these games, because that's always a fun time. But anyway, I do think that some kind of double soul or cross mechanic should return as well. I do think moment-to-moment combat can play out pretty much the same. Maybe there's some tweaks they can make. I can't think of any off the top of my head, and it's not really like something that I see as needing major changes really. Because I mean, they shook up the combat a lot for Star Force, and I'm not going to shit talk those games or anything, but the combat is just, it's not the same. It's cool in its own way, and I'm going to go back to the Star Force games in the relatively near future to kind of reevaluate them for the first time in a long time. But I don't need combat in a BN7 to be like drastically different, aside from maybe how crosses or double souls or whatever work. But you know, the classic, you have a folder with chips and you select the battle chips to send into battle, different charge shots, different Navi Customizer things where you can hold like back plus B for a shield or like whatever. All that stuff is great. Maybe even with the armor piece thing on the arms, maybe you choose between a defensive option like having a shield or choosing to have like greater attack power or a chance to flinch or something like that. And then maybe like the body could give you super armor or some other different attributes, and then obviously feet would be like air shoes and stuff like that, and then the headpiece could be any number of things. I do want to double back real quick as far as the exploration is concerned. I think that giving some kind of indicator or like scan function to indicate where or how many mystery datas are left in a particular area would be really nice. I don't want it to be the kind of thing where you're pinging constantly. It'd be nice to introduce something like that, kind of akin to the modern 2D Metroid titles where they have scan pulse, which is like a totally optional thing, but it's something where you can kind of ping your current area and see if there are collectibles nearby or a breakable wall or like whatever it might be. Although I don't think the exploration needs to be like that deep. It's really just a means for getting from place to place and then initiating encounters by either ambushing the enemy or whatever. I don't necessarily think an ambush system needs to be implemented. I think it'd be kind of cool, but not completely necessary, I don't think. Anyhow, when it comes to double souls / crosses, this is the main thing that reminds me a lot of Persona. And obviously there's tons of anime that are centered around like lend me your power kind of stuff, you know, like Goku and Vegeta fusing and shit like that. It's been around for a long time, and it's not just present in Persona and Mega Man, but those are two video game series that I think are kindred spirits kind of in that way. And I think introducing some kind of quest line for your double soul / cross partners would be really cool. And assuming that this is like a relatively big budget game, then I don't think it's out of the question. I also think it'd be cool if you gained more abilities for said double soul or cross depending on how much of that side quest you do. And you could gate some of them behind story things or like have certain prerequisites. I wouldn't want them to be too tedious, but I do think something like that makes sense, so you can't just grind out the best version of King Soul or something like that. Tora needs to come back. I think it'd be cool if there were many double soul candidates in Battle Network 7, with which you would have to select which double soul / crosses you would want equipped at any given time. This could provide an additional layer of replayability that Battle Network 4 tried to do, for instance, but without diverting all the cool shit between two versions and being forced to play through the game 3 times simply to unlock your full suite of double souls. And I kind of like the way BN6 handled it, where they were mostly optional and not entirely tied to the story. I do think that maybe certain characters could be introduced in the story to some capacity, and then you could do their quest line or whatever you want to call it in order to unlock and power up said double soul. There's a myriad of ways you could do it, but I think introducing some social link-esque system for that, just insofar as them being like side quests. Again, I liked how BN6 handled it, but it was just the one mission. I'd like to see more of that, although I don't necessarily need to play as other Navis per se. That would be cool, but at the same time, if they're doing the 3D angle, that probably would be more demanding, maybe? this brings me to, I believe, the final idea I wanted to introduce, and that is, for those of you who have played Pokemon Black and White 2, and you probably already know where I'm going with this if you have, I would love, more than anything, for a Battle Network 7 to have a Pokemon World Tournament style post-game. I think there should be other post-game stuff, like I think a post-game kind of akin to what we normally see would be cool. Additionally, I think you could have a tournament arc kind of squeezed in there, kind of like BN3 did, but then have it be in post-game. You can battle, ideally, pretty much everyone from the previous 6 Battle Networks. I know that's incredibly ambitious, especially if they're going 3D models and can't reuse assets, and especially if combat plays differently and they have to program different behaviors and shit, but Capcom's not a small company. I mean, take some of that Monster Hunter or Resident Evil money and pump it into Mega Man, man. What are they doing over there? I don't understand. Capcom is thriving more than ever, and what used to be their mascot is like just getting basically nothing these days, which is crazy. I refuse to believe that they are still scared about oversaturating the market with Mega Man, because it's been damn near 20 years since they stopped doing that. And plus, it's so desaturated at the moment that you could announce several upcoming Mega Man games in each of the different series, and I don't think people would complain at all. Yeah, give us a Mega Man 12, but give us an X9, and give us a ZX3, and give us a Battle Network 7, please. If you've played through the Pokemon World Tournament and kind of messed around with it in Black and White 2, you'll know how awesome of a feature that is, where in the main story, you just fight a couple of people who are prevalent to the story at the time, but in the post-game, you unlock the ability to challenge the Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, and Unova leaders in a tournament. Like, they have a pool of mons they can pull from, but the brackets are random. It's such a fucking sick post-game thing they included, and each regional tournament has their own battle theme where it's a remix of the original battle themes. And so, on top of BN7 having banger battle themes, I would want remixes of the BN 1 through 6 themes for the tournament. And even in the story, if you were to fight the character that was introduced in BN 3 in the main story, yeah, play Great Battlers, or play the main boss battle theme from BN 3. There should also be plenty of boss battles and stuff that have the BN 7 theme, but if you fight a BN 6 character's Navi, then yeah, play Surge of Power, regardless of circumstance, but particularly in these tournaments. I think that would be so sick. And so I think that covers pretty much all of my bases as far as the key features that would be a part of my ideal Battle Network 7, which again is kind of an ambiguous hypothetical type of thing, but it's fun talking about this stuff and I wanted to get it out there. Let me know what you think about some of these ideas, and also once again, let me know down in the comments what you think, not only of these ideas, but if you have separate ideas or some kind of expanded thoughts on ideas that I presented, because I do want to do a follow-up video talking about your ideal Battle Network 7. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, of course, if you enjoyed, and I will catch you guys in the next video.